Um, so the first chart here that I want to share is really a chart from the United Nations, right? So this isn't a political chart for us to be concerned with, but it's a great chart that tells us a little bit about the trend of the working age population. Now, they define the working age population of people between the ages of 15 and 64. Now, many of us don't hire 15-year-olds, but some of our members do, right? Lifeguards sometimes are 15-year-olds. You can get certain work permits to work in certain industries and do certain jobs at 15. And many of us employ people past the age of 65 or 64 also. But when we look at that working age that fits right in between those two bookends, that's kind of the sweet spot that employers are looking for when they're doing most of their hiring. So when we look at that and we look at the trend since 1950, we can see that we were adding significant amount of people. I think at 20 million people every 10 years to that population band. So that population band continued to expand as we added jobs all across the country. And as we added jobs, we always had a nice influx of population to absorb those jobs. And it kept a really nice, healthy balance. So post World War II, a great balance since 1950. Well, coincidentally, when we look at things and we look at it and we say, okay, what happened with COVID? And all of us say with COVID, something changed. And it did. And there's a huge coincidence in the flattening of that line that occurs right at or around 2020, right when we were dealing with COVID. And when we look at how flat that line becomes for the next 20 years, if I have that right, and we say, all right. So for the next 20 years, we are only going to add 5 million people to that working age population. Now, this doesn't take into account all of our immigration growth and those types of things, I don't believe. I think it's just the people who are alive and well here and working. So when we look at this flattening that occurs and we look at what we are used to having to absorb jobs, it's no wonder that we're starting to see an unbalance between job openings and our unemployment levels. Now, coincidentally, with our unemployment levels, they're low. But let me break that number down when I say 5 million. So, what that really means is we're going to add 250,000 more jobs in 2025 than we had in 2024. Not jobs, people, excuse me, in 2024. So when we look at that and you break that down to your state, your county, it really starts to get to a number of, many counties are only going to get 15 or 16 more people. And that's if everything was equal. That's if every state got an equal number and every county within the state got an even distribution of these people. And that's really not how it works. And we're happy to have you with us, Amy, coming from Florida, because Florida is a state that has an influx of young people, right? Compared to the state of New York, for an example, that has a decrease of young people, right? So the young population isn't all in one spot evenly across the country. So we have to also look at those population trends. That's another discussion for another day. Now, Nick, if we look at this second slide, I appreciate you showing this. So this is some new data that I've put together. And I had to make some assumptions with this data, but there are some really important factors to consider. And then this gets into some of the discussion that we can have with Amy, you can have with your executive. And that is if we look at the red line on this chart, that red line is our unemployment line. So these are the number of people, and it goes back, I think the chart starts in 2008 or 9, and unemployment at that time was really high because we had the housing crisis recession. And we're having those issues that occurred at that time. And we look at the black line, and that's the number of job openings, right? So we had plenty of people in that time to select from for the job openings. So an abundance of skill and an abundance of people, and that made hiring much easier, and it allowed us to control wage inflation. Well, as time progressed and baby boomers started to retire right around that 2011 and 2012 timeframe at a rate of 12 100,000 baby boomers a day. So when that starts to decline, and we see that coming down, and they're moving out of that working age population, and our job openings, as our country became healthy coming out of the recession, we start to see a really nice steady increase. And everything then flip-flopped right around 2018-19 timeframe. And for most of us, we can remember things got really difficult then, but it was for a very short period of time. And then COVID was upon us, and everything went out of whack. And we've never experienced anything like that in our lives before. So we tried to manage that. Now, as we came out of COVID, that was the same time the population had flattened, and those two emerged on each other at the same time. A huge coincidence, in my opinion, a huge coincidence. In addition to that, other people dropped out of the workforce. And look at the gap that we have there, where I have the blue arrow pointing at the great resignation, right? We had a huge gap of more job openings than we've ever seen, with very low unemployment, historic low rates of unemployment. And from my research, the best I can tell is that's the first time we've experienced that since World War II. So when we go back to most of us who are working today, we've never experienced anything like this. Now, what's really interesting is right as those two lines are getting ready to merge onto each other, and our job openings are coming down and our unemployment is coming up a little bit, we have to say, okay, where are we going from here? And this is really the important assumptions that get made. So if I just take what the Bureau of Labor Statistics says is going to be the number of jobs added between now and 2033, and I look at that and I add those job openings to the current job openings, that's that black line. And it's interesting that that black line isn't a significant difference between the black line prior to 2020, right? It's a continuation if we look at it. If we just drew a straight line from 2008 to the end of the black line at 2033, it's a pretty consistent level of job increases and openings. Now, the interesting thing is the red line from an unemployment standpoint, if the black line does continue to trend up, the red line has to stay flat or drop, right? You can't have both of them trend up at the same time, I don't believe. So it's going to be very interesting to see what lies in front of us. And I think it's pretty reasonable for business owners, HR professionals to predict that we will continue to see difficult times and periods of times in our future. It's going to be very hard to match the skills that we need with the job openings that we have. And it's very likely we may see another great resignation in just another year to 18 months, when that job gap gets about 3 million. 3 million more jobs than unemployment. That seems to be the magic number. That's Phil Brandt's predictions. And Amy, I don't know if you have any opinions or thoughts as you look at this graph and what that might mean to second harvest, but for me, it means we're going to have to really take a look at how we use technology, how we engineer jobs, and how we use the talent that we have in the most critical positions that we're going to need, and find solutions for other ways to produce our business and run our operations without the same number of talented people that we need today. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because I know we're going to talk a little bit about professional development, and all the more reason to be building your talent within, so that if people have opportunities in the company they're in already, they may be more likely to stay, if depending on what the opportunities are out there. But yeah, we work hard as a nonprofit to be lean and efficient. Those are some of the things where they're kind of magical words here, that we want we work in volume, so we need to be able to do that very efficiently. And also, I just think in terms of when we hear about other food banks. There's 200 plus food banks that are part of the Feeding America network around the country. So we know each other well. We compare how we do things. We have friends in St. Louis that we know that also have a food bank. So some of the time we'll hear how many people are in a department and how many people that equals that they're serving. So we're very attentive to how well are we running our operation.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link aimea.org/This Week at Work, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment, like LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you are. And you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.